Hey guys, I had to do some editing. Editing of the save game files, so I won't spoil anything that happened after the picture that you see right now. But here we are. It's Friday night. There are a lot of games that I need to cover, and I'll just briefly mention what is happening in EU4 games, since I don't have much time to make separate videos for those. And I didn't stream most of them because I don't know. Is it EU4 more demanding than it was, or is it my PC just slowing down I don't know. In any case, I'm just not capable of streaming our Saturday game, and also probably not a chance of streaming Wednesday game, which has 35 players, so it's very unstable already without me streaming. But there will be a Friday game and a new Saturday game, which I might be able to stream because they have like 10 to 15 players, and I'm pretty sure everyone in Saturday game will be European, so I should be able to stream, since the host will also probably be European and there is less lag then. Anyway, let's dive into this game. I'm not gonna load the save right now. I'm just gonna go through these saves and show the map. You'll have to use a bit of your imagination. Otherwise it would take far more time to cover all the things that happen in the game. Anyway, and probably most of you saw the Gaku's video and what was his assumption of what was coming in the session, aka Japan being annexed, Prussia and Austria dying in the first session, and then people just leaving and crazy stuff, you know. Anyway, well, I'm not gonna spoil it yet, but here's what happened. We all knew that Russia or France were going to justify a war on Prussia, and that's me in this game. But unfortunately, that happened much earlier than I hoped for. As you can see, it's June, second year of the game, and the war is already going for quite a few months. So I say it only took them like maybe 3 months to prepare the war, to get a justification done, since they don't start with any CBs on Prussia or Austria. And I kind of figured that could happen, and I didn't do what I usually do as Prussia, and that is rebuild my army completely from day one, which would include deleting some of my divisions and recreating artillery mostly. Well, in this case I had to keep my cavalry, and that kinda screwed things over, but in the end it seemed like a good idea, because during the war I wasn't able to get any money or any artillery or even cane food was really hard to get during the war. So what happened was Russia, France and Sardinia later on declared war on me, was allied with Austria, Ottomans and Switzerland. Those are all players at that point. Was also allied to two Sicilies, but they ended up doing nothing because they had no military access through Pope. In any case, I got home 1 hour before the session, and I wasn't there for 3 days before the session, so I didn't really have much time to develop any complex plans with my allies. But the general idea was I was going to give one province of my country to Austria so they could form SGF. In that case, SGF becomes their satellite. Now the thing about satellites and spherelings in Victoria 2, unfortunately there is a very stupid mechanic where you cannot call your allies into the war unless you're the war leader. And this doesn't work only for satellites. So you can always call satellites no matter if you're war leader or not, because they kinda count as part of your country, but not really. In any case, this was the main reason I wanted Austria to form SGF. Also, there is a thing where they get to control SGF troops completely, but unfortunately what Austria didn't realize is that since they can ally and unally their satellite. They can, I mean, they can just not call them into the war, and everything would be perfect. See, the main point was France, as you can see, could occupy Rhineland, but they couldn't push into Prussia because there is no land over here where they could go through. Because I didn't call at that point Brunswick, I didn't call them into the war, I didn't call Hesse-Kassel. So France couldn't get military access through there, and they would probably be useless for most of the war unless they would justify a separate war on Brunswick or this guy. But that would give us enough time to defeat Russia and then focus on France. As you can see, we at this point were already pushing into Russia. We've defeated their armies in all the battles, and Russia somehow managed to retreat and escape surrounding and complete army wipe, which isn't really that easy to do in early wars, since they have such a massive army compared to Prussia and Austria. But this gave enough time to France to push and then occupy SGF, since Austria made a mistake and called SGF into the war. And this was June 14th. Let's go into next save. It's November the 1st. And as you can see, at this point we had to commit to French offensive and stop them over there. Meanwhile, Russia took their time and managed to recover and start occupying what was previously sieged by us. Meanwhile, Sweden, which was AI ally of mine, managed to occupy quite a lot of Russia, and somewhere between these two saves, Russia actually went bankrupt. Unfortunately, neither me nor any of my allies noticed that. I usually just ignore pop-ups, and that's one thing that actually some people keep on, but it's really annoying to have those pop-ups on, and it's nothing to regret. I don't really wish I had pop-ups on because they would probably screw some of my battles, and micromanaging is far more important than seeing those pop-ups. Anyway, if we actually noticed Russia going bankrupt, we could have completely wiped their armies. Since Austrian army was actually quite close, they didn't commit their full army to defending from France. I moved my army here because my army was completely useless here. I didn't want to occupy any of the Russian land because that would just increase the attrition I took during the war, and it's really bad in the early game. Attrition kills more people than battles. Anyway, it really wasn't looking pretty over there. We were losing to France, but then Austria rolled a 5 attack general. Now, in the beginning of the game, I had a free attack 2 defense general, which was quite decent, and the major thing that you have an advantage in a very early war against Russia is that you have more generals than them. Or, let's say, since it's basically 2v1 war on this front, Austria and I have, for example, both of us have 2 generals, that's 4 generals in total, and Russia can only have 2 generals at the same time. They're not gonna cover all the troops with generals, so if you start multiple battles, you're gonna be in a huge advantage, simply because they don't have generals. But Austria then sent their general towards France, and we kind of stabilized this front. I think we managed to push them a bit over there in this save. Yeah, we did. At this point, I think France messed up a bit, but that gave enough time to Russia, and they managed to push into Prussia, basically without any battles because they simply didn't have enough men to cover all that front. And they occupied most of my land. As you can see, this is still being occupied by France, but at this point I think, I did call all of my other miners into the war, and they started on occupying land here. But at that point, I think, Sardinia already joined the war. But that was another issue for us, and I think... by the way, Creamlord, who was supposed to play Sardinia, started off as Russia, and then Marconi, since he was late as Russia, he jumped in at one of these saves, and Cream switched back to Sardinia, which then kinda, I don't know if that messed up things for them, but it was kind of a surprising attack for Switzerland, as they didn't really have enough men to cover their entire country from both sides, from north and south. They were able to siege a few territories over there. Not a insanely huge issue, but you know, every army that you can get in the early war is very, very important. Going to the next save. As you can see, we had quite a few rehosts. It wasn't really the stable game, but that's always the issue with the first session, especially when there is a huge PvP war. The game just not that stable, and I think in the next mod I'll probably just give Tripoli to Ottomans and maybe annex some of the minor countries into bigger ones, because that kind of makes game slightly more stable. Now I should mention that Spain wasn't actually in this war. They were part of the war, but they didn't send any troops, and they didn't really care about that war. You can see they were busy annexing Portugal or taking stuff from them. Also, UK didn't really come into this war at all. They weren't a part of the war. You can see they were allied to everyone just watching the war. I figured that would be the case, you know, when there was that huge announcement of defensive alliance between Russia, France, UK, and I believe Sardinia. I don't know if there was anyone else. Could have been Spain in that alliance as well, but maybe it wasn't. In any case, I figured, well, you know, UK has really no reason to help Russia and France in Europe. First, France and Russia are already very strong in the beginning of the game, and they can definitely win this war if they play well. And there is really no point for UK to commit there, because they, even though they are kind of allied to France and Russia, they really want France and Russia to bleed, because that makes them even stronger compared to them. And there is one more thing: if UK was to go, you know, and annex Japan, then they probably wouldn't want to fight Russia and France, because those are really the only two powers that could potentially stop them or slow them down at least. And with that defensive treaty, they just neutralized that threat, and they really didn't have to commit to Europe at all. Anyway, in this save you can see that, well, there basically nothing really happened between those two saves. Well, it's kind of short time. But then let's hop to the next save. It's February 8th. That's kind of 7 months from the previous one. And as you can see, we managed to push Russia from Prussia once again. We've liberated SGF completely. They are still in the war, but then Sardinia made some gains against Switzerland. Not a huge issue, but those mountains are really important because you can't afford to re-siege that, and defensive positioning is very, very important. Now, Austria at some point went to fight Russia even in those forests and mountains over there in Galicia. I didn't really like that move, even though he won with the 5 attack general and Russian army was just complete garbage. I don't think Russia won any battles in this war. They won, I think, 2, like, I don't even want to call them battles, because those were really just retreats, because we needed to fight France, and so they caught few armies off guard like here, but nothing major happened. We didn't get any stack wipes or anything. So I didn't like that move by Austria to, you know, try to fight Russia further than, you know, defending just our borders. And the major issue is, if I was occupied for much longer, then my war exhaustion which was already quite high, would go even higher, and I couldn't reinforce my army. I already had huge issues with money, and I think during one of these 2 saves, I want to say, it could have been one of these 2. Anyway, I did go bankrupt. You can see by prestige, I guess. 5th in prestige here. Still 5th. Oh, I'm not exactly sure. Okay, definitely during this save. During this save I went bankrupt. It wasn't a huge issue because my troops weren't in any battles at that point. I was just resieging the stuff. But at that point we figured, you know, we really have to do something and commit to one front, because we weren't gonna win this war in the long run, and even if we won, then probably the same thing that happened to Creamlord would happen to me. You know, Prussia wins, but they get insanely depopulated during the war, that it doesn't even matter if they win. And what we came up with was to just go into France, because there was nothing else. Then Austria started arguing that we, instead of going into France, we should go into Sardinia, occupy them, force them out of the war, and then go into France, which I thought we wouldn't have enough time, because even though we've defeated Russian armies over here, they would just go back to Russia, replenish, and then go push into Prussia once again. Now Swedish AI, even though they weren't fighting any battles over here, Denmark was also part of the war, by the way. Same thing as Sweden, my ally. The good thing is Russia starts as their capital is in St. Petersburg, and that gave Russia quite a bit of war exhaustion. Since their capital was occupied, I think they were at this point they were at maybe between 20 and 30% war exhaustion. In any case, that made them, regenerate slower, and they did have to commit to some battles against Sweden, which gave us slightly bit more time. And I'll show you why we had to commit to one front at this point. Obviously, you have to have in mind that we had less troops. Now, less troops, I think at this point, both Austria and me had around 50 brigades. France should have, I think, around 100, and Russia had 115. With Ottomans having like 20 or something very, very low. Ottomans really started in a terrible shape in the beginning of the game. But we had our allies. Now what happened was we kind of did a combination of both Austrian and my plan. He pushed into Sardinia, and at the same time we pushed into France. We managed to defeat some huge French stacks in Rhineland, or actually not Rhineland. Well, yeah, there were some battles in Rhineland, but mostly in SGF, in Bavaria. Now, there was an issue during the save where Austria went out of sync. Now, because of multiple rehosts, we decided just to continue playing, which at that point shouldn't have affected the war. Since Austria wasn't rebuilding army, they were not training any new units, and being out of sync really does affect that big time, because you don't get those units when when you fix it. But what happened was we managed to crush France. Now, he didn't lose too many stacks, but he did lose a lot of troops, and he just needed time to rebuild those. But we were winning every battle in France, and we were pushing heavily. Now at that point our war score was... I'm actually gonna load this save, and just Gurren messaging me about replacements. Anyway. So we pieced out Sardinia, Piedmont. The Creamlord playing Sardinia actually accepted this deal. I can probably... okay, 63 war score without them. 61 with Sardinia out. Anyway, it doesn't really change the war score, but as you can see we have plus 50 from battles, and then 3 negative tickers against them. With Posen right now being occupied, but as you can see, we are pushing Russia out of my land, and France is also losing yet another battle, and we're just pushing them out. At this point, what happened on Austria's player screen was completely different from what was actually happening in the game. So you see this battle that was reinforced by Russia, and what Kevin playing Austria saw was him wiping all of those Russian stacks. And I think at that point he crashed, so we had to reload, and Russia, being played by Marconi, was extremely pissed because of reloads and stuff. I don't know why, and he didn't want to play for one more hour, which was the session's time. He wanted to end right now. With no one in the game agreed to that, so he just rage quit. And also French player had to do something, so we just agreed to peace, even though at this point war can still go both ways. I think we are winning. Even though they have more troops, I think we're in a better position because Russia still quite occupied, and only their capital is unoccupied here, but it's probably going to be occupied by Sweden or Denmark once again. We're pushing Russia out of my land, so that we can probably unoccupy this very easily. And we're pushing also into France. Now, SGF can also recruit new troops. As you can see, all of my German miners can get more troops, and Hanover is close to allying me, so I can get one more ally into this war. But the point is, not to mention we have 3 Tiekers and +1 from Posen if we liberate it. Then we would have 4 Tiekers and we would be able to just force piece them out. And at this point we had 4 war goals, 2 of them being German, mine war goals, as you can see, Alsace-Lorraine, this thing that I can't pronounce that I will try to do, Wielkopolski. That's this area. So we would probably win just by amount of war score that we had, but it's not for sure. It's still kinda equal. It's far more equal than in the beginning of the war, and I think at this point this was probably the strongest we stand during the entire war. And let's see, Russia had 44 war exhaustion, so they would really replenish their troops slowly. Probably same thing for me. I'm actually not at 100% war exhaustion, which is quite surprising. I really thought I would be. France at 9%, which is not high, and Austria at 10%, which is pretty much equal as France. Ottomans only 3%, so Ottomans can actually recruit more than push into France. As you can see, I am only at 22 out of 45 brigades built, so I can get more troops if needed, but I required some more funding because I went bankrupt, and as you can see, not the best economic situation for Prussia, but we were winning battles and we would be able to push them further into France. So what we agreed on was just 1 war goal, and our side was obviously winning the war. So I just took Alsace-Lorraine. We left Russia untouched. AI war goals don't matter unless you really want those war goals. I don't know, like releasing Finland or stuff like that. But that was not what we were looking for, so it didn't really matter. Anyways, I'm gonna load the current save. Let me show you that one. I think we're in a quite decent spot right now. That I formed NGF, and Austria is still very strong. I think Austria and Ottomans did really well in this war. I didn't really do that much. It had to be Austria doing all the stuff, all the battles and all the major decisions. Obviously, I did have some influence, but it was mostly them doing the job with that 5 attack general. And then having Switzerland in this war was actually extremely helpful because of that strategical, area. And those mountains are really impossible to fight into. So they occupied French and Sardinian troops for quite a while, since we could just go through mountains, reinforce, or You know, if France, for example, had some units over there, we start battles over there, and then we just go through Switzerland and catch them here. They cannot retreat. They get stack wiped. Stuff like that. Pretty much very nasty stuff. So they cannot ever just ignore Switzerland, which is a very good thing. And that's pretty much it in Europe. Spain obviously grew. They took, I think, two states from Portugal. Over there in America, USA grew a bit. Obviously abusing some game mechanics, which is something Gurren always does. And taking stuff from Mexico. I think Brazil ate Paraguay and Uruguay. I should be here. Yeah. So Brazil is doing quite well. I think Peru is also a player. I'm not 100% sure though. Argentina is AI, I believe. I might be wrong. There were a lot of people that came late to the session, so I'm not 100% sure. We have Persia as a player. They took, what is this? It's not Macron, it's Kalat. Okay. And then Japan, which surprisingly is untouched, especially for Gaku, since he made such huge drama about it. And as you can see, instead of conquering them, UK decided to just fear them, and it's really not that easy for UK to invade Japan day one. First of all, they don't really start with too many transport ships, and then due to that huge war in Europe, they didn't really have all the resources they would normally have, since all the excess resources are pretty much going to UK, since they're number one in prestige and number one GP. Can't really deny that. And then they have India, which is producing like tons of goods. Anyway, what I expect from next session, since Winchinio is taking over Russia, and that's another great player, I think we're gonna have at least one more war before I form Germany, in which Russia will try to stop me. If we manage to win that war, we'll be in a great shape. Now, the thing about those nasty day one wars and first session wars is that they kind of force people to form permanent alliances. You know, since Austria decided to help me in that previous war, and there was Russia, France, UK alliance, it's pretty much guaranteed that Austria and I are gonna stick together until the end of the game, because simply we're forced to. There is no other way. And it kinda is boring, you know. There are no backstabs. I mean, there can always be backstabs, but what does Austria really gain from this right now? And we'll see how the game develops. Now, the good thing is Ottomans didn't really lose too much, except for their soldiers, but they didn't have to commit so much to this war, and they can still you know, annex Egypt and get their stuff, which they normally do. Now, Russia committed the most to this war, I believe, aside from me, and they will probably suffer because of that. As you can see, they start with I think they start with a 4 military attack. I could be wrong, but yeah. I only got one military attack in this mod. Prussia actually starts with army professionalism. I don't know if it starts in vanilla. I don't think so. Well, that's a slight buff to Prussia, which they really need. But then there is a kind of a huge nerf, and that is in Free Horas for Germany decision. You cannot form Germany before 1850, pretty much. That's what this says. Have national fraternity, and national fraternity is unlocked by researching nationalism and imperialism, which comes at 1850, and then you have to wait to unlock this. Luckily, there is quite a good chance. There is 5%, which is quite decent chance. Should be getting it in a year, but we will have to survive for 8 more years as NGF and without any wars to be able to form Germany. At that point we'll be very strong and we'll be able to fight Russia or France on our own, but right now Angef is still quite strong. If we go to the ledger, I think we have probably the same amount of soldiers as France does. Okay, we have more than Austria, which is quite surprising. Yeah, it's almost the same as France, and then Russia is 100 ahead of us, but that's not a huge deal because they're heavily behind in tech. It's more or less even, all the segments. And we'll see what happens in the next session. Will be a very interesting one if Vincino really does show up, which is there is always a possibility of him not showing up. Anyway, there is one other small announcement, and that is Cream Lord and Aiden, being Sardinia and France respectively, decided to just swap countries because Aiden won't be able to fully commit to all the sessions, and I think that was a pretty decent choice. Shouldn't really change anything politically because they were allies before this, and there is Vincino coming, so this should strengthen that alliance and should make for a very balanced and interesting game. Anyways, we'll see if I'm gonna stream today.